Cicadas, the creatures in our gardens. This presentation was actually the idea of Bobby Herbs. And Bobby Herbs is, she's one of the really important members of the webinar committee. She's our corresponding secretary, and Bobby is my right-hand help with NPSNJ, keeping things going. And she had this great idea to ask you folks to send in pictures from your gardens to me, for me to create a presentation out of. What a great idea. I've done presentations on creatures in the garden and the importance of native plants before, but I've never really solicited pictures from everyone else. Well, we did that this year, and people were asking, well, you know, did you get enough pictures? Did you get enough pictures? Did you get enough pictures? You folks buried in me in pictures. I got more than 600 photos submitted from your gardens, from your hikes, and it's just been fabulous. It has just been fabulous. So I have to confess, I had to pick and choose, because if I went through all 600 photos, we'd be here for several days going through them. Maybe I need to do a follow-up on this and do the part 2 of the life and times of insects and others all around us. But let's get started, and let's start talking about some of these creatures that are in our gardens that you folks sent me pictures of. First of all, we need to realize that there's an enormous diversity of insects and arthropods and other creatures in our gardens. So there's 91,000 species approximately of described insects in the United States, but there's a sort of estimated another 73,000 undescribed creatures that we don't know who they are. There's 4,000 different species of spiders described from North America. There was a study done in Pennsylvania that said that in a single acre, the top 5 inches of soil, there's 130 million insects. Now, the good news about this is there's so many different insects out there that no one person can possibly know them all. And I sure as heck don't know them all. But running through all these photos that you folks have sent has been just so much fun trying to figure things out. And one of the things to remember as we go through this is that if I've scared you with the number of insects and arthropods and the spiders that are around, most arthropods, they're beneficial or benign. Most of them you will never see, and the ones you see, most of them are good guys. And one of the reasons that I'm a big proponent of native plants, quite frankly, is I started out my studies in botany, and then I went into entomology, the study of insects. And really, they go together. Insects rely on native plants. You know, native plants support wildlife and insects in ways that introduced plants simply can't. Our insects, they can't recognize, they can't use plants from other parts of the world. They either don't recognize them as food, or they simply cannot physiologically cope with the chemistry of plants that they did not evolve with. There have been some studies done with some butterflies, spicebush swallowtail, for example, in a laboratory. It'll starve to death instead of trying to eat something that's not its host plant. It won't even try to eat other plants. And so when we look at some of the plants that are available in garden centers and whatnot, they're labeled, non-native plants are often labeled as pest-free because nothing eats them. And as a lot of folks have been beginning to say, you know, if nothing's eating your plants, then you're doing something wrong. Now, having said that, I am not advocating, when I talk about having insects eat your plants, I'm not talking about having all your plants chewed up and looking like this. Most of the insects that you see in really high numbers that do a lot of damage like this, these are introduced pest species. These are alien species, alien insects that do not belong here. Most of them, their names sort of give it away that they don't belong here. Japanese beetle. probably not from here. Scarlet lily beetle was introduced from Europe and Asia. This picture here, this is actually a viburnum leaf beetle destroying I believe this was a viburnum dentatum up in northwestern New Jersey several years ago. So most native insects, they don't cause a lot of visible damage because they're hiding in plain sight, because they don't want to turn into bird food, quite frankly. So enough about the advertisement for why we should care, and let's start talking about some of the wonderful native creatures that you found in your gardens. This is a morning cloak butterfly, which I thought I'd kick this off. Maria Taney sent this to me just a couple of weeks ago. She said it came out and was posing for her on the 25th of March. These creatures, they overwinter in our gardens as adults, which is really quite extraordinary when you think about it. I've actually had someone stop me in one of my lectures and say, well, no, insects just, they all die during the winter. Well, they don't all die. Every insect in your garden has to figure out a way to get from one year to the next. And these morning cloaks, my goodness, they overwinter as adults. They mate in the spring. The caterpillars feed in communal webs on a bunch of different things. They like willows, they like elm and cottonwood and birches. And then these beautiful gray caterpillars with the red spots on them, once they get some size on them, then they wander off trying to find a place to pupate. The adults don't feed on nectar, as we tend to think of butterflies feeding, but rather they feed on the sap from trees, especially oak. The adults, the new adults, emerge in early summer, do a little feeding, and then they aestivate for most of the summer. Aestivate is like hibernation, but in the summer. Aestivation is when you go quiet in the summer and slow down and hide away, and then they come back out in the fall, feed a little bit more, getting ready to hibernate in the winter again, where they hide in leaves, they hide behind loose pieces of bark, and that's where they spend the winter, right in your gardens. The American snout butterfly. This is another fabulous butterfly that was sent in. Most of you may have never seen a snout butterfly. They are partial residents in New Jersey. They only really normally show up in the southern counties. Now I'm in Hunterdon County, which is, well, depending on how you cut up the state, we're either in northern New Jersey or the mythical central New Jersey. We have seen snout butterflies here at the farm a few times. But unlike the morning cloak, the snouts are very particular. They only feed on hackberries. If there are no hackberries around, you're not going to have any snout butterflies at all. And of course, they are named for, these are these palps that come out, the lovely snout that the butterfly appears to have. But I'm not only going to be speaking about insects. I'm going to be speaking about some other creatures as well. I'd be ashamed if I didn't mention spiders, and you guys sent in some wonderful spider pictures. This is a trash line spider, and you can see why it's named a trash line spider. They're a type of orb weaver. There's actually two trash line webs here. So you have the one here, and then there's another one down here, sort of in the foreground that was underneath it. But they wrap their prey in little silken cocoons and drop them right down the center of their web, which is where the name comes from. Orb weavers, all the orb weaver spiders, they're very docile spiders. They are not aggressive at all. They will tend to run away if you get near the web. And I have heard that the orb weavers, which tend to one way or another, and we'll see a few more examples of this, they tend to have something down the middle of their web like this. And I have been told, but I haven't researched this, that the reason that they do that is to keep larger creatures, birds and other creatures, from blundering through the web and messing up the web in the middle of the day. It takes a lot of energy to create a web. So if they can keep the large things out of it and only focus on the prey that they want to capture, it's a real advantage to them. This, by the way, I believe this is a humped trash line spider, but I'm not entirely sure of that. There are several different hump line, trash line spiders that are native to New Jersey. And then we have these fabulous pictures of the marbled orb weavers. These are all females. We've got the front and back of the same spider here and here. And then this is another picture taken by Carolyn Crickus with the female eating, wrapping up, something. It's hard to know what that is, wrapped in that silk. Now these are gorgeous spiders. They're also known as pumpkin spiders because they are often, although not always, bright yellow or orange. They tend to hide. You don't normally see them hanging out in the web. They make a little silken nest down at the edge of the web, usually by wrapping some leaves together. And they hide in that nest. But one of the threads of silk that goes from the web to that nest is the signal thread. And that signal thread is what they feel the vibrations on. So if something lands in the web and they can feel the vibrations in the signal thread, then they know to go out because they've caught something. But they're not at risk by simply hanging out themselves in the middle of the web. The males, by the way, are much smaller. They don't have the huge abdomen that the females have, but these are always really beautiful spiders. And again, these are another orb weaver spider, type of orb weaver spider, and they're very docile spiders. I really quite enjoy these. I believe several years ago, I think I did a Halloween post on Facebook with a pumpkin spider. So can you see the spider in the middle picture? Right there in the middle, hiding in plain sight here, is a goldenrod crab spider. Goldenrod crab spiders are often on white flowers or yellow flowers. They tend to blend in well with their flowers. You don't always find them on pink flowers, but here we have it on a wonderful Joe Pye weed. So they're large, they're harmless to humans, but they don't spin webs. These are ambush spiders. You can see up in the corner there, this was, who sent this picture? Let's see, Eric sent this picture. So we had both this and we had this picture up here where the ambush spider, the crab spider, had gotten itself a nice big bumblebee. These can be fairly large spiders. And similar to Charlotte in Charlotte's Web, the females will guard their nests very carefully until after their offspring hatch, at which point the nod to E.B. White in Charlotte's Web, the females die after that. But they make sure that their nest is guarded until their young hatch. This is yet another garden orb weaver spider. This is the yellow garden spider, also known, and I love this, also known as the writing spider, because of the scribble that it makes down here in the middle of the web. These are fairly large spiders, and a lot of people find them a bit intimidating. You shouldn't. Again, they're orb weavers. They're very docile. They're going to run away from you. But having said that, they can get a fair good size on them. When the spiders are younger, they tend to put their webs in more protected areas, protected from the wind. But as they get larger, they tend to get more and more bold and put their webs out, their larger webs out, where it's rather easier to run into them. And they feed primarily on wasps, bees, damselflies, and dragonflies. Now, I would imagine that many people listening wouldn't be particularly concerned about a spider that took out a few wasps in the garden. Wasps are good guys, but I understand that there's a lot of prejudice against wasps. But some of you are probably horrified to know that these spiders feed on damselflies and dragonflies. Well, it's the circle of life. Everything has its place and time. And, although the dragonflies may not like the idea that there are spiders that are going to eat them, that is what they eat. There's no judgment in nature. It's simply what things do. It's what their position is. This is a beautiful picture of an eastern pond hawk. It's a female. The females of eastern pond hawks are this bright green. The males actually are a powder blue, about the same size. These are quite large dragonflies. They like still waters. So they're only going to lay their eggs in ponds or something very still. They're not going to use running water whatsoever. They actually go across and dip their abdomens and just touch their abdomens to the water to lay their eggs. The larvae of dragonflies are actually called naiads. So these are water-dwelling larvae called naiads, and they're also very predatory, but they creep around in ponds and predate on whatever they can find there. Both the adults and the larvae are very agile hunters. These pond hawks are amazing to watch them hunt, and they catch things in their legs in flight. Beautiful, beautiful creatures. So we're going to talk a little bit about some caterpillars. It's interesting to note that really up until the 1990s, caterpillar idea really was pretty poor. What happened was, if you found a caterpillar, if you were an entomologist and you found a caterpillar and you wanted to figure out what it was, but you had to rear it out. There were some old keys. Peterson had a wonderful key, but it was very technical and really didn't take things to species very much. And then in the 90s, in the Shenandoahs, there was work being done to try to deal with the devastation of the spongy moth. Used to be called the gypsy moth, now called the spongy moth, which was doing terrible damage. And they were going to spray the forest to try to control the moth. But they didn't know how much off-target damage they were going to do. What other insects were they going to damage? So they put out some test plots and did some spraying. They sent their caterpillars to a lab in Connecticut. In the first week, they got 6,000 caterpillars to identify. And suddenly the race to understand what the caterpillars of all these various moths and butterflies that entomologists had been collecting forever, what did the caterpillars look like? What did they look like? And this is the caterpillar, a young caterpillar of an abbot sphinx, feeding on fox grape. These caterpillars feed at night only on grape and porcelain berry, actually. There's a possibility they also feed on Virginia creeper. These adults, these are wonderful bumblebee makers. They actually, even though they're moths, they buzz as they feed, which is sort of a fun thing for a moth to do. If you can try to mimic being a bumblebee, maybe you'll get some predators to leave you alone. Now, this is a non-native insect. This is the Ailanthus webworm moth. Webworm means that the caterpillars live and feed in communal webs. In our region, the only thing that these caterpillars are going to feed on is tree of heaven. This is a tropical moth that has expanded its range into North America as the tree of heaven has become distributed. But it is a very beautiful little moth, here on both bone set and resting on a leaf of spotted bee balm. One of the things that I find interesting about moths is it's easy to get intrigued by what's coming to your lights. I'm not advocating that people leave their lights on all night long just to see what moths come to them, because Lord knows we have enough light pollution as it is. But if you're coming home in the summer and it's after dark and you've been out somewhere and you come up and you have a light on by your door, look to see what moths have come to them. Ailanthus webworm moths will absolutely come to porch lights, and a lot of other interesting insects as well. Gives you an opportunity to see wildlife right on your porch. The American dagger moth caterpillars are an insect that I've actually gotten a lot of questions about over the years. I don't know why this particular caterpillar intrigues people. I did get a photo of the moth, the American dagger moth, off of bugwood.org to show you that it is not a particularly flashy looking moth, but the caterpillars are certainly quite fascinating. They're bright yellow and they have these little tufts of black off of them. What happens with these, and with a lot of caterpillars, is that as they get ready to pupate, as they get ready to form a chrysalis or form a pupa, they wander away from their host plants. And that's when we often notice these caterpillars. I get pictures of caterpillars in driveways and on cars and on porches. I get folks that are very upset because they've been carefully watching some caterpillars, monarchs come to mind, and suddenly all the caterpillars have disappeared and they think something has eaten them all. But caterpillars often leave their host plant and pupate elsewhere. They may pupate in the soil, they may pupate on another plant, they may pupate on the side of your house. They wander off. And American dagger moth caterpillars certainly do that before they pupate. This is another caterpillar which is not particularly picky about what it eats. It actually has a very wide host range and feeds on a great deal of different species, mostly woody plants, trees and shrubs. Now that's a fabulous looking caterpillar. I'm just saying, it's actually an extremely variable caterpillar. This is the smeared dagger moth, also known as the smartweed caterpillar, because smartweed is one of his hosts. But again, it's a generalist. It feeds on a lot of different plants. And I received pictures of this from several different people, both Lan Jen Tsai and Amelia Harris McGeehan. And again, I got a picture off of Bugwood here to show you what the moth looks like. The moth is, well, it's a smeared dagger moth. It's the white moth with gray smears on it. But the caterpillars are quite extraordinary and can be found all over the place, quite frankly, because they are not particularly choosy about their host plants, but they are very, very flashy. Painted ladies are another one of these not particularly host-specific butterflies that we have. In the overall scheme of things, most insects are actually very choosy about their host plants, but probably because generalists are more common. A lot of the photos that I received of butterflies and moths were from generalist species, not insects that are very choosy and very picky about their host plant. But this is a painted lady. It's a beautiful painted lady sitting on a purple coneflower. It's considered actually one of the most widespread of all butterfly species. In 2017, this is actually a caterpillar that migrates in clouds. There was a eruptive year, what's so-called eruptive year. There was an enormous number of these in 2017, and a massive cloud of them actually showed up on radar approaching Denver. And it took them a little bit to try to figure out where it was, because they know, or what it was, because migrating bird flocks show up in a certain way on a radar. And this looked wrong. This looked different. To my knowledge, it is the first time that there has been a documented sighting of a cloud of butterflies showing up on radar because it was so dense. But one of the problems with the painted lady, which, as I said, has a very wide host range, is people get it very confused with the American lady. And the American lady is a very choosy eater. Caterpillars are solitary. They feed in a nest of leaves tied with silk. Here we have a really great picture of one feeding on sweet everlasting. They make these little silken nests. They only feed on pussy toes, everlasting and pearly everlasting. That's it. They create these beautiful sort of green and brown pupae. This is actually my picture here. And then you get this beautiful butterfly, also my photo, feeding on Pennsylvania blackberry there. But I find that there's an awful lot of confusion with folks, if I may go back one, between the painted lady and the American lady. And the one will feed on a great many host plants. And the second, you're only going to see this if you have the right host plants nearby. So one of the things that was quite fun in looking through the photos that everyone sent was sometimes you complimented each other so that I managed to have an entire range of pictures for a particular species, like I have for the spicebush swallowtail here. So their primary hosts are spicebush and sassafras. I've got a spicebush in the back here of this, but I received this whole series of photos from different people. So here we have a very young caterpillar where these caterpillars, they tie up the leaves. It's called a shed, and they feed inside the shed, which protects them and helps them hide from predators. The spicebush swallowtail caterpillar has the advantage is it also has these lovely eye spots where it turns its head down and it tries to make itself look like a snake. And this picture from Chris Morrow making it look like a snake, I think is just a fabulous shot to try to scare off predators. Then we have, caterpillars getting larger. Here it is getting very large, now wrapped up in a sassafras leaf. This is a picture from Lucy Hooper. And here we have it is pupated inside the leaf. And then this, where it has emerged, picture from Maria Taney. But I want to focus on this for just a moment here. Spicebush swallowtails overwinter in your garden, in my garden, anywhere that they are. They overwinter as a pupa. That is how they spend the winter in your garden. And they may attach themselves to the leaf where they were feeding. They may attach themselves to a dried stalk next to them. They may attach themselves to a piece of fence or a piece of grass. They don't emerge again until, well, really their peak flight period is late May to early June. That's when most of these butterflies emerge. So the point I want to make here is that recently there has been a lot of talk about cleaning up your gardens in the spring after we've had 5 days where the temperature has gone above 50. I beg of you, do so with a light hand. I don't know where the 5 days at 50, where the temperature goes above 50 came from. But if we've been so kind to our gardens and we've been so kind to our butterflies and all the creatures in our garden, and in the fall, you listened, you left the leaves in your garden and you let your stems stand through the winter to support the seed feeders in the winter and to support the native bees and the butterflies and the moths that live in your garden and the beetles and all the other creatures. Do not then take the opportunity in early spring to do a heavy cleanup of your garden. If you're going to cut back stems, cut them back, lay them down, or put them gently on a brush pile on your property. Because otherwise, these wonderful butterflies and creatures that you've encouraged to your garden, that you've put host plants into your garden, If you clean up your garden thoroughly, then, for example, the overwintering spice bush swallowtails that aren't going to really emerge in big numbers until late May, you're going to be removing them from your garden. I beg you not to do that. Io moths. If we were in a room where I could see your hands, I would ask how many of you had actually encountered an Io moth before. This picture of the caterpillar over here was submitted. And the Io moth is one of our stinging caterpillars. Now, stinging caterpillars usually hurt for about 15 minutes. I've encountered quite a few different species of stinging caterpillars in my life. There's one dead giveaway to gardening. If you see a caterpillar and it has spines, think twice about touching it. If you see a caterpillar and it has spines, and when you bother it, it arches its back at you and pushes its spines your direction, well, definitely you do not want to touch that. Just leave it alone and let it be. These turn into these beautiful, huge moths. These were pictures that I got off of Wiki. These were posed moths. It's female. Yes, female's the upper one, and the male's the lower one. I'm trying to decide if I have those reversed. But they're beautiful moths, and they feed on quite a few different plants, but the adults don't feed at all, which is not that uncommon for some of the larger moths. Luna moths also don't feed at all. So they're some are really beautiful silk moths. But everything's not big and beautiful. Some things are tiny and fascinating. So this is an extreme close-up of a sun-credible Saturn sunflower with this skinny little caterpillar on here. And this is a caterpillar which has a very uninteresting name. I mean, really. And it's a tiny little moth. But they feed in plain sight because they feed on flowers and in flowers. And no one usually sees them. Similarly, blackberry looper moths. This picture from Elaine Silverstein, 2022, they feed on the flowers, mostly, sometimes the fruit, on a wide variety of flowers. But that's a beautiful moth. It's a beautiful green moth that comes to your lights at night. And they almost spend all their time feeding on the flowers or the fruit. But probably the best, and this is a very extreme close-up, the best one that hides is the wavy line emerald, also known as the camouflaged looper. So you can't really see a caterpillar here, because it's glued parts of flowers to its back. And in this particular case, this one was on black-eyed Susan, but clearly had come off something else that looks like it probably had been on a mint recently before it glued those on its back. These caterpillars feed almost exclusively on flowers, and they glue parts of the flowers to their back. If they're on a white flower, they're gluing white petals. If they're on a purple flower, they have purple petals in their backs. One of these days, I'm going to put together a combined slide with all the different wavy line emeralds, all the different camouflage loopers, with all the different flower colors on them. But this one came in from Caterpillar on Black-Eyed Susan. One of the things that's been very interesting about this particular project, this particular presentation, is looking to see what people sent in. So the picture that was sent in that this slide came from was, in fact, this beautiful pupa here, chrysalis, which is hanging from coxcomb celosia, which is not a native species. So again, caterpillars will wander off and often pupate on a different plant than their host plant. This is the caterpillar in the lower left-hand corner here for the variegated fritillary. This is a pair of fritillaries mating. Their only host plant is violets, and further south than here, also passion flowers. And as Deb joked about in the introduction, fritillaries are not particularly good mothers. I have a habit of saying that they're terrible mothers, which is probably overstating it a little bit, but fritillaries don't seek out the host plant to lay their eggs on. They're very casual about that. They will drop their eggs sometimes near a host plant for their young, but often not so much. So the scattered distribution of violets, which are the host plant to a great many fritillaries, is perfectly adapted to the scattered way that these butterflies lay their eggs. You cannot hope to host fritillaries on your property with a tiny little patch of violets or a little pot of violets, and a giant lawn of non-native Kentucky bluegrass. And yes, Kentucky bluegrass is not native. Great marketing there. Because the fritillary caterpillar will never find its host plant that way, because the mother fritillary is not going to lay her egg on the violet plant or on the passion flower plant. The caterpillars hatch in November. So you have a tiny little caterpillar. It eats the egg case, the egg covering that mom, thanks mom, that's what she gave her. And then they have to wander off in November, hoping to find some violets to eat. They overwinter as tiny caterpillars. In the spring, they finish their development by feeding more violets. And then they pupate, look like this, and then they emerge into beautiful butterflies. So yes, as Deb alluded to in the introduction, you should have violets all over your lawns and support the fritillaries. Oh, this was a wonderful series of shots that was sent in by Lucy Hooper of cloudless sulfurs. So I love this because it had the dates on it as well. So cloudless sulfur caterpillars come in two different forms, which is sort of fun. So you can have the green form, which is in the middle here, or you can also have the bright yellow form. So Lucy took, we have this caterpillar, which is starting to spin up into a pupa here. That's here. It's pupated on 8/28. By 9/5, this is turned quite yellow because the butterfly is about to emerge. And these butterflies only use the wild centers and partridge peas. This is not a resident species in New Jersey. It's a regular stray. We have several species like that, which only overwinter further south, but they often wander into the state and produce some populations in the summer. It's a beautiful butterfly, mostly seen in the southern part of the state. Similarly, we have another excellent series of shots of sleepy orange butterflies. And this butterfly has a really interesting story. So it has the same host plants. And here we've got the egg on August 1st. We've got a caterpillar on August 17th. We've got the caterpillar starting to spin up, getting ready to pupate on the 1st. And on the 2nd, here we go. On the 8th, it started to darken down. On the 10th, it has just emerged. It's a freshly emerged caterpillar. The wings are not strong enough to fly yet. They're still sort of wet. And then here we have it fully dried off and ready to fly away. And so this is a butterfly that was not a resident in New Jersey. It was an occasional stray in New Jersey. You didn't really see it. But presumably with global warming, its range has started to expand further north. We have had them here in Hunterdon County on our farm. I don't know, we did not see them last year. No, last year was a very bad drought, but we have had them here. There is a resident population at Duke Farms, And there's another one at Wildlife Refuge. I don't remember which one now off the top of my head. And Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve, just across the river in Bucks County, also has a resident population. So this is an example of an insect that seems to be expanding its range further north as global warming comes upon us. So keep an eye out for this. It is, as with so many of the sulfurs, it insists on sitting most of the time with its wings folded, but you can just sort of get a hint of it here. It's actually quite bright orange on the inside. Very interesting butterfly, and we're hoping that we'll see it again at our farm here this year. You never know what you're going to see when you start taking pictures. So it's a matter of looking around, and I was so glad so many of you had so many great pictures to send in. This is the American copper. Very fond of mountain mints. I have seen coppers just going crazy, nectaring at mountain mints. They also are attracted to butterfly milkweed. Now, one of the points I want to make about this butterfly, if you look up the host plants for this butterfly, it tells you that the primary host plant is sheep sorrel, which is an alien species. That's an introduced species, but it's a native butterfly. Surely some of the other rumexes, such as swamp dock or pale dock or common sorrel, surely some of those are also host plant to this, even though the host plants are almost always listed as sheep sorrel. One of the other fun things about American coppers is they really they really aggressively pursue the females. It's almost comical watching them chase the females around. So if you manage to spot them and find them when they're in hot pursuit, it's quite worth the watch. So, is it a holly blue or is it a spring azure? Entomologists, like botanists, like everybody else, like to find things that they like to argue about. And I found this lovely quote off the North American Butterfly Association of North Jersey website. All it takes for a spirited argument are 2 taxonomists and 1 azure. So there seems to have been for several years now been this argument about what to call some of the different azures. Some groups have decided that there is no such thing as the holly blue and that they're all spring azures, also known as summer azures. Some of them have lumped, some of them have kept them split. It doesn't really matter. What we have is we have some beautiful pictures here of a wonderful butterfly laying eggs. We have both photo from Elaine and one from Chris where they're laying their eggs on New Jersey tea. And then we have this great picture with an ant tending a caterpillar right here. I'm not sure if you folks had spotted that. A caterpillar. The azure caterpillars hide extremely well, often in flowers. And the ants are tending them because the ants will often, well, they tend insects for sugary secretions. They tend aphids because aphids, many species of aphid process plant sap too quickly. And so functionally their excrement is full of sugar, and the ants will tend them for that, actually farm the aphids so that they can collect the sugar. But the same thing with some caterpillars. And it's mutualistic because while the ant is tending the caterpillar, the ant is also protecting the caterpillar from predators. So it works very well. This is a great series of pictures here of whatever you want to call this particular butterfly, spring azure, holly blue, on New Jersey tea. Now, it turns out that there are folks that plant gardens just so that they can watch ants do their thing. And I have to say that Chris Murrow, who sent us a bunch of ant pictures, is one of those. So these are funnel ants. Chris did the idea of them. I did not. I am not an ant specialist. But one of the fun things about this particular genus is this entire genus is considered keystone seed dispersers. They're very good at seed dispersing. And with this group, these are celandine poppy seeds on a seed pod that was, I think, opened artificially for them. It looks like it was torn open. But they're collecting these seeds out of there because of these eliosomes, these fleshy appendages here, this here on each seed. And that is full of proteins and lipids, which are really excellent food sources. So they're going after these and they're taking these back to their nests, feeding on that eliosome, and then they discard the seed. They either discard it right in the nest or they throw it in their midden heap, functionally planting the seed. What a great way to get your seeds dispersed. Similarly, bloodroot also has eliosomes. And here we have the funnel ants again, Aphanogaster rudis, doing their job, taking the seeds away. But up here, we have odorous house ants, which will feed on the eliosome, but they don't take the seeds back to their nest. So they just sort of rob the eliosome, take all the good stuff and leave the seeds behind. Wonderful, wonderful ant photos. And here was presumably just an experiment just to see which seeds they would move faster, where they would move the bloodroot seeds or the celandine poppy seeds faster on this. Other species actually with eliosomes include trilliums, Laytonias, Corydalis, Dicentra, and others. And ants get a bad rep. But ants really, they're like the cleanup crew. They can't take out, this is treats colored ants, they can't take out a spotted lanternfly unless it's injured. But I believe the phrase that Chris used, if you crush the spotted lanternfly a little bit, the ants be happy to clean up after you. Ants are, they just come up and clean things up. They clean up whatever's left behind and they do a great job at it. There's about 800 different described species of ant in North America, according to Ant Wiki. Here we have a dead swallowtail, and if you look here, we've got a pavement ant here doing the cleanup job. This was a great series of pictures, mainly because you don't usually see what the immature cicadas look like. And this was dug up and found and put out for display. So we see the dog day cicadas, which are the ones that, they have the sound of late summer. It's either the happy sound of late summer or the, oh no, summer's almost over sound that you get when the dog day cicadas start singing in the dog days of summer in August. And many of us have seen the shed skin, or the exuvia is the shed skin of an insect. Many of us have seen these, but you don't usually see what they look like when they're still underground feeding on roots. And then, of course, there's some confusing insect names. Black and orange bugs tend to get all lumped together. And people either think they're box elder bugs, which I didn't even put on this slide, or they pick one of these. So you have false milkweed bugs. You see sort of a two nested hearts here. You have small milkweed bugs with one big heart. You have large milkweed bugs with a line across here. And these are immature large milkweed bugs. These tend to all get lumped together. And if you look at them carefully, you realize that no, these are all different. They're not even, two of them are in the same genus. The false milkweed bug and the small milkweed bug are in the same genus, but the large milkweed bug is in an entirely different genus. They're not even that closely related. I like to talk about aphids, and this was the only aphid slide that anybody sent in, so I put it in here. There's a lot going on in this slide, and I want to talk about it a little bit. So these orange aphids, these are oleander aphids, Aphis nerii. They're an introduced aphid, which builds up in huge numbers, particularly on swamp milkweed. But there's a lot going on here because you have So you have, this is a wingless aphid, and she's giving birth right here to young. They give birth to live young. This is a winged aphid getting ready to fly off to another plant. But you also have these just dead aphids here with all the juice sucked out of them, because you have lady beetle larvae that are all over this leaf that are feeding on them. This is a pair of immaculate lady beetles that were sent in. Immaculate lady beetles because they have no spots on them, but they're mating. And here's the 14 spotted lady beetle, another picture that was sent in. That is an insect that was introduced intentionally as a biological control agent for the Russian wheat aphid. Didn't work out very well and take care of the Russian wheat aphids, but that was the great thought. But everybody loves lady beetles. Getting back to these guys, everybody loves lady beetles, but I can't tell you how many people are terrified when they see these on their plant. They're just baby lady beetles. And this thing right in the middle here, this is what's referred to as an aphid mummy. So this has been parasitized, and a tiny little wasp has laid her eggs inside it, and her young have eaten it from the inside out. And soon those little parasites will fly out, parasitoids will fly out and parasitize other aphids. Stink bugs, so many stink bugs. People seemingly didn't know about stink bugs until there were marmorated stink bugs. There were a lot of stink bugs before marmorated stink bugs. The one in the middle here, this is an immature brown stink bug nymph. It's zoomed up pretty far. They are a plant-eating stink bug. But here we have spine soldier beetle, two of them, which look just like stink bugs, but they're predatory stink bugs. One is feeding on a monarch caterpillar, one is feeding on a Colorado potato beetle. Again, no judgment here. It's what they do. It's what they do. And this is a wonderful shot of a tiny little parasitic wasp who is parasitizing the stink bug eggs. This is a wasp. It's a Chrysolcus species. I don't know which species it is, but that's a wonderful little picture there of the parasite. Back to another group shot here. This is the black swallowtail, the state butterfly of New Jersey. It overwinters again as a pupa in your garden. So you've got the adult here laying eggs on golden Alexander, which is the native host plant, perennial host plant of the black swallowtail. Here it is in amongst the golden Alexander laying eggs. There's the egg right there. Here is the caterpillar eating its own exuvia. A lot of caterpillars do that. After they shed their skin, they'll actually eat the old skin for the nutrients. This is a lovely picture showing the caterpillar holding on to a bit of dill to feed on, and the caterpillar preparing to pupate. And if all goes well, you get more butterflies like these on the left. But you may also wind up with your pupa. Here's what the pupa would have looked like. With the big round hole in the side, that's not right. That's where this wasp emerged. This is a Trogus species, probably Trogus pennator, which is one of the parasites of swallowtails. Sometimes things go awry. Sometimes your butterfly pupa winds up producing a wasp. A little bit about bees. Most of the bumblebee pictures that we were sent were actually eastern carpenter bees. The male eastern carpenter bees have these lovely yellow faces that you can see here. And they tend to, they're not always, you can see this one's fairly yellow, but many times they tend to be quite orange. They make tunnels in wood. Again, they're not bad insects. We don't like them when they eat our houses and tunnel into our fascia boards. But they're a little bit like ants. They're the cleanup crew. You know, they go out and they tunnel into dead wood. from is that we build our houses out of dead wood. You can tell the carpenter bees because they have a shiny abdomen here. Bumblebees have a fuzzy abdomen. So here's another one here, shiny abdomen, orange. But the bumblebees, you see the bumblebees are fuzzy here. This is the brown belted bumblebee, which are particularly fond of common milkweed. I often see them on common milkweed, but you'll find them on a lot of other plants as well. They create nests right at soil level, sometimes just a little bit down into the soil, but they don't make very big nests. Another series of pictures. This is the snowberry clearwing, mostly, we think. So here we have, it's a day-flying moth, one of the hummingbird clearwings. Here they are mating. Now this was sent in as a egg on Viburnum nudum. Viburnum nudum is not supposed to be a host of the snowberry clearwing. It's supposed to be a host of the hummingbird clearwing, which is Hemaris thisbe. So young caterpillar, you can see why they're called hornworms. They have the little horn here. Here's the larger caterpillar still with the horn. It comes in two different colors. You have a brown form and you have a yellow form, yellow-green form. The caterpillars pupate. They spin up in leaf litter on the ground. I threw this in sort of at the last minute because I wanted folks to recognize this. This is one of the blister beetles. If something, a lot of things that are brightly colored or really strangely colored, if they don't look like they're afraid of anyone, that's probably because they have a reason not to be. The blister beetles, they do something called reflexive bleeding. If you bother them, they bleed orange hemolymph, insect blood, out of their joints. But it contains, in the blister beetle's case, it contains a poisonous chemical that'll blister your skin. One of the really interesting things about these things, other than that, I suppose, is that the larvae are these tiny little parasitoid-like creatures that they lay in wait on flower heads and parasitize bees. They take a ride from the bees back to the nest and then just sort of lay back and eat the bee larvae and the bee provisions back in the nest. This is the common green June beetle. Many of you are probably familiar with this. They do produce very large grubs in the soil, which can be a problem to ornamental plants. They love living underneath mulched beds, but usually they're kept in check. And how are they kept in check? By these lovely two-spotted scoliid wasps. We have a section of our, I suppose it's on the edge of our meadow. It's right where we mow up to the edge of the meadow. And every year these scoliids are just flying all over the ground and they're never going to sting you. I walk through, there'll be dozens and dozens of them flying around and they're simply hunting for beetles, green June beetle grubs to lay their eggs. So if you have good diversity, you don't have a problem with the June beetle grubs because you've got the scoliids that are keeping them in check. This is the European praying mantis. You can tell it's the European one because it has the black armpits. It has these black spots up here. It was actually introduced to try to feed on gypsy moth, didn't work. Spongy moth, which didn't work very well. And this is a really terrific picture that was sent in of our actual native praying mantis. This is the Carolina praying mantis. Tends to be rather brown, tends to be sort of fat on the back end here, and it's perfectly camouflaged here on this pitcher plant. Lovely photo. So there's so many wonderful plants in our gardens. There are so many wonderful creatures depending upon them. This is a great list of different resources that you can use. Caterpillars of Eastern North America, this third one down here, where is it? There it is, came out in 2005. David Wagner, that was his lab in Connecticut that they sent those 6,000 caterpillars to that first day And then they just kept on coming. And he wrote the book on caterpillars of Eastern North America. There's guides to butterflies and moths, beetles. The Biota of North America project is a great place to look up plant host ranges. Butterflies and moths, a wonderful website, North American Butterfly Association, North Jersey. iNaturalist is wonderful. Fowler and Drogi's pollen specialist bees of the Eastern United States. I didn't even get into pollen specialist bees in this presentation. We sort of covered that pretty heavily at our last conference. Jared Fowler's got a wonderful site that has the pictures from that. And of course, Spiders of North America, the Princeton Field Guide series. These are all wonderful resources for you to use as you try to identify your own things in your garden. And I want to thank everyone again so much for sending in so many great pictures to create this presentation. It was just a joy to go through them and work through them and identify them and put them together into a story. I think we have some time left for some questions. There's Deb, who's going to help me manage the questions in the Q&A.
So first of all, people are saying thank you, and I want to say thank you. Randy, this was an amazing presentation. I've been looking forward to it and telling many people to watch it, and it was more wonderful than I imagined. So I want to also thank Bobby Herbs again for the idea. I think it was
absolutely
a good idea. Yay, Bobby. And I also want to thank all the people who sent in pictures. That was really cool. So it just was amazing. Everyone,
and thank you those of you whose pictures I didn't get a chance to use,
including me.
I'm thinking maybe there's going to be a part 2 of this.
I think there should be a part 2. There's so many people saying how much they look forward to this. This is really fantastic, and it brings together your knowledge as an entomologist and your knowledge as a plant purveyor. So very few people have that detailed knowledge of both, and so it was just amazing. There's not a ton of questions actually, because I think you were so comprehensive, but here's a few. An ID question. Is the clouded sulfur the same as the cloudless sulfur?
No.
Okay.
2 different butterflies. Go to, and I've got the screen up here, go to, for information about them, go to, where is it? North American Butterfly Association, NJ, so NABA NJ. And they've got good information on both of them.
Great, great. So someone asked some poisonous questions. Are any of the caterpillars poisonous, which I think you then answered, but then said, somebody had this good question, do birds eat the poisonous caterpillars? Because you did mention some caterpillars are poisonous if we touch them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know if any of the birds eat any of the stinging caterpillars. That's actually a really great question. I do know that on Facebook, and I am not a member of this group, but there's a group that does nothing else but follow the lives of stinging caterpillars. That is their passion. So I really don't know if birds will feed on the stinging caterpillars. Great question. Don't know that.
Okay. Stumped Randy. That's impossible. Okay, everybody is saying, by the way, just, oh my God, we want part 2. This was amazing. So I think part 2 is going to come, everyone. Someone asked a really good question about a pesticide question, which is, because of course, if we want these bugs, we should not be using pesticides, but they asked our caterpillar, are the dunks, do they kill, let me see, I'm trying to think. Well, mosquito dunks harm dragonflies? No. Okay.
No, they only, mosquito dunks are Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, which is specific to fly immatures. So it's only going to deal with Diptera. So in a pond, it's only going to go after things that are technically flies, which only have 2 wings. It's a whole order. So no, it will not bother the dragonflies in the least.
Okay. Someone asked, each year my Heliopsis are overrun by insects that resemble milkweed bugs, hundreds of them. What to do?
Heliopsis, really? What to do is send me a picture.
Okay.
Because I don't know who that is.
Okay. That's great. So, Someone asked, it would be good to know, I guess this is a comment maybe for the future, to know the size of magnification where possible for your part 2.
Yes,
Or
it's
maybe you want to
difficult.
comment on.
Well, it's difficult since I did not take the pictures.
Right.
So there was one picture where someone had a finger in the edge of it and I left the finger in. So it is difficult, but that's a really good idea. Give some indication of what size we're looking at for these things so that they don't think the stink bug is actually that big, because that could be terrifying to anyone, even an entomologist. So yes, some size indication is a really good idea.
Mm-hmm. Someone says, in terms of requests on future talks, please do a talk on night blooming plants for nocturnal insects.
Fun.
Maybe, yes, that's a really cool idea. And then relating to that, kind of about the moths, the nocturnal, is what's with the moths and porch lights? That's a question, I think.
Well,
and maybe we could you could speak to, I've heard that we should turn off lights outside to protect the night moths. So
we should. So moths, if we think about the world before electricity, moths navigate by starlight and moonlight. And when there's street lights and porch lights and all these lights on, it's very, very confusing if you're a moth. That's why they fly around lights, because they think they've found the moon and they're not used to being able to find the moon. That doesn't make any sense to them. So yes, minimize your lights. Now, if you're, out at night, make sure that, you come home, do not stumble up the stairs and break your leg because you left the lights off because you're trying to be nice to the moths. Certainly leave lights on as necessary. But yes, there's a whole dark skies program to try to get cities and communities to both limit their light use and keep their lights focused down, which helps with both migrating birds, but also night creatures that are not used to having that kind of light.
Okay, great. 2 questions about overwintering. Where do spiders overwinter?
Well, some of them overwinter in the leaf stuff. Some of them overwinter as eggs. Certainly, I believe it. I'm not a spider expert. Actually, I have a woman who works for me who really loves spiders, and I wish she was standing at my elbow right now to help me answer this question. But I do know that quite a few of them overwinter as adults. I certainly have been moving some things around just work-wise, and have been finding some lovely large spiders who are wondering exactly why I moved the pot that they'd spent the winter under. So most of them, I believe, overwinter as adults, not as eggs, but probably some of them actually also overwinter as eggs.
And here's someone who has a question about being gentle with the cleanup and waiting a little bit longer. They said, won't we see the pupa on the dry stems we are cutting down?
No, you won't. You'll never see them. So most pupae, most chrysalises that overwinter are stem colored. They're dirt colored. They're brown. They're camouflaged because they do not want to be eaten by the winter birds and the winter mice and everything else that's been spending the whole winter trying to find something to eat. They're trying to look like they belong there, and there's nothing to be seen here. Move on, please don't eat me. So you don't notice them. You don't notice them. I mean, we have a lot of native bees. Actually, they'll be inside hollow stems of plants, which is why, I advocate, like, cut the stems down, just lay them in your garden. As your garden comes back alive, it'll cover it up with foliage. You'll never even know that the stems are there, and it will be fine, and your wildlife will still be able to survive it. Or create a small brush pile for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then somebody wanted to know, are milkweed bugs and nymphs harmful to the milkweed plants?
No, they've co-evolved. Probably the only thing that I can say is, and I say this from someone who harvests milkweed seed, usually if you open up a milkweed pod and there's mold inside the milkweed pod, that's usually because a milkweed bug has fed through the pod into the pod, through the side of the pod into the inside, and introduced a fungus. because the inside of the milkweed pod should be sterile. And it is, right, until it gets somebody sticks a dirty nose in there and sucks on a seed, and then it introduces disease inside. But they've co-evolved. They've learned to live with each other. And the plant can sacrifice a few seeds to the milkweed bugs, and it's all well and good.
A related question I think you're gonna, you said it's all well and good, that's is that someone said, what about the aphids specifically, or milkweed bugs? Are they detrimental to the plant? Leave them alone or remove them?
Well, the ones on milkweed that you're seeing, the bright orange ones, those are oleander aphids. They don't belong here. They're an invasive species. I don't have any problem with discouraging oleander aphids. They are very aggressive. They're particularly damning, it seems to me, on swamp milkweeds. They seem to really like the swamp milkweeds. But having said that, it's very tricky to manage them. You can hope for a lot of predators and parasites. If you don't have a lot of predators and parasites, you can wash them off. You can squish them with your fingers. They're not going to hurt you. They're just little balls of squishy goo. But one of the tricky things is if you have monarchs present, if you have monarch caterpillars present or monarch eggs present, and you're washing off your orange aphids, and you also have monarch caterpillars on there and monarch eggs, very difficult to sort of manage that. So discouraging them gently, but remember that even if you use safer soap, which is a lovely, nice, safe insecticide that you can use to kill soft-bodied insects, if you hit a monarch caterpillar with safer soap, it will also die. So it's not selective for what it's going to kill.
Which I think is very true in general of pesticides, and why we have to be very cautious of using them, right? So I know it's getting a little bit late, so I'm just going to choose two more questions. Thank you to everyone who wrote questions, and sorry we won't get to every single one, but I think most of the main questions have been answered. So the last two is, in a small space, is it better for insects to have diversity, one of each plant, or a large patch of the same type of plant? I think that's a great question for me in urban Montclair, New Jersey, where I and all my friends have small spaces.
I think to create a really good functioning garden in a small space, I think trying to lean as hard into diversity as you can is a good idea, because that way you can have a progression of blooms, progression of bloom times. You can have nectar and then nectar and then nectar as the season goes on. You can have pollen as the season goes on, and you can support various different things. Even if you have a tiny space, if you can cram 3 different species in there, so you have something large and structure, something in between, something here, so you have bloom, a progression of blooms, that's going to help support more wildlife than a single patch. And even in a small space, look at it in layers. Have something taller, have a shrub, have a mid-range plant, and then have a ground cover. So you can cram a little extra into that small space by making sure that you look at all the layers of the garden. But trying to lean into diversity as much as you can as the space allows is a good idea. But yes, if you have the space, more than one of each plant is always good.
The perfect answer for me, my garden has been critiqued as being a little bit too much going on. So thank you for that. So someone had a very interesting question about the intersection of bugs and non-native plants. It's a little long. I'm going to read it, though I think it's interesting.
Okay.
So it's often said that non-native species are not recognized by native insects because they didn't co-evolve. But in some cases, as you mentioned tonight, they do support native insects. Do we have a sense for whether native insects' diets are changing as native species are reduced?
It is still the insects, the native insects that have adapted non-native insects, non-native plants as host plants, is very, very much the exception, not the rule. The black swallowtails that have decided that dill is delicious, they are the exception. If you think about all the different insects, focusing on the exceptions that have figured out how to thread that needle and deal with a non-native plant, that's not going to help all the rest of the souls out there. So how much insects are going to adapt like that as time goes on, I don't know. And I don't think anyone can predict that. There is some folks that have said that, well, several thousand years from now, everything will have shaken itself out. It was, well, yes, but how many species are going to go extinct while they're waiting to evolve so that they can either recognize or digest a non-native plant? We simply don't know. It seems just rather easier to try to support them by putting the native plants in place where they belong to support the native wildlife as best we can.
So I'm gonna renege on my saying it was the last question, ask one more, because this is by one of the chapter leaders for Bergen, Melissa Thier, and she said that she leaves the leaves and they blow to the sides of her yard and they kind of get piled high on the fence, by the fence. So she really wants to help the insects. So she asked, should I gently even out the leaves to allow the insects in the bottom to get out, or is it better just to leave them?
She could probably just leave them, but if she wants to even them out a little bit for aesthetic reasons, that's fine as well.
I think she wanted to do it just to help the bugs. So
the bugs will find a way. They're clever little beasts.
So I think at that, we will say goodnight to you and to everyone who sent photos, many people, hundreds of people are still listening to Bobby Herbs for the idea. And we all look forward to part 2 of this, Randy.
Now I have to come up with maybe I'll just be the same title, just part 2. I don't know. I'll have to come up with something clever.
So happy Earth Day to everyone. And also join us on May 17th for our next webinar. Thank you, Randy. Do you have any parting?
And thank you everyone for coming and listening this evening. This was a lot of fun. And thanks so much for sending in all those pictures.
Great. Good night, everyone.
Good night, all.